Hi, let's get right down to Sound City. Good afternoon. This is Soldier Shoes, and welcome to Tallahassee, to this great neighborhood, and thanks to all in this community for participating so considerably online, so that we have a line that is available for us to do this particular segment. Today is Sunday, and it's a good day. I really feel like we should get all we have concerning a good day out. I think it's healthy, and I think it's considerate to not withhold good news or positive news as if positive news is as well good news that therefore everyone should know about. Now, not literally go from one person to the other, chronologically, if you will, and just tell your business. But when you do encounter someone, I think it's good if something's good going on for you in your lifestyle. You should find a way by any means to express that at that time, because though we're individual, we live together, literally. Saying that, I say what this segment is about: us, rights, and freedom. Do we handle these two terms better singular or plural? Is it best with the word right when we're determining our individuality as a singular term, or do we handle it best in plural, called rights? And the same as for freedom. When we're implying something to ourselves, is it better to use freedom singular, as it is freedom, or freedom plural, freedoms? And making sure we do one of those things, I think, is the solution to today's confusion that has upset a lot of our neighbors nationally. The pandemic has affected us all indefinitely. Since that's happened, a proportional population has expressed more emotion than the others of us, meaning some things affect us different than it affects others, in the sense that if it has an origin or a history, then culturally we amongst each other can possibly have had experienced it more in depth than the other person, because in the world we are too proportionally divided into nations, and that's how in this globe we exist. That's that's two aspects: interpersonal and intrapersonal, intelligently speaking. Where I'm coming in and where I'm staying is I think it's unfortunate, somewhat. And I think more so, it's sad to know that while we as one human race exist together, there's still something between us. And the reason I'm in that position or place is because I honestly do not agree or disagree that that's the situation we're in. That's mathematically the place we're in. In my opinion, the place value we're in is infinite. But the place value that we're at is somewhere from 1 to infinite. The question is, where do you think we are supposed to be today, right now? That's today's date, at this given time, at this given moment, with all this going on, keeping in mind every issue that's being raised, thinking about every conflict that's being created as well being solved or compromised, things from the day before, things that we can expect or plan tomorrow or for tomorrow. Now, we have our U.S. Constitution, and our U.S. Constitution is for us all. The mysterious thing to me, that's a just thing, is that our U.S. Constitution, it states things that apply to an individual. I don't want to keep saying our and placing a possession from a first person perspective into the third person perspective on us and the U.S. Constitution, nor do I want to repetitively direct the U.S. Constitution towards any particular individual, because that's what the U.S. Constitution document is supplying, that information, that element and that factor of life that is each person's. And now the important thing is that each person is the person that's contributing to the U.S. Constitution document. What it's contents are. It's written, if you will, in the second person perspective. And I think that's very, very crucial, because the writer has not included him or herself in that piece, except that who is mentioned extends the courtesies thereof as well as therein to that sir or ma'am. I think that's the blessing part of life, is that that person was thoughtful enough to write that. Even if it wasn't the U.S. Constitution, it as a piece, I think, is respectable and respectful. And that's all I think. That, I think, is what's got a lot of people using politics and coming up, believe it or not, with ideas for change and diversity. As well as the U.S. Constitution has been composed. I think that's sad, because I think literally there is in U.S. Constitution something. I think it's just one thing, because of the suffix ION and what a word becomes when it's used in that tense or context. I'm sorry. I think that because the U.S. Constitution, which I'm now referring to the document specifically, is written in second person perspective or third person perspective, and as it's read, it's in second person perspective, which is the logical pace when discussing the U.S. Constitution or reflecting constitutional rights or constitutionalism or politics, if you will. It's possible that a person in the first person perspective reading that document is missing what that document is about, but is not missing what he or she is reading, which is a document at all. Now, there's one thing to be conscious, and there's another thing to be conscientious. And in the powerful art of sound, which is where I'm very talented and gifted, there is the great balance of equilibrium and pan with reality, intelligence, and mindset. Now, a growth mindset can easily accept the U.S. Constitution document as a U.S. Constitution document. And if that person's that way, when that person's that way, the reward in life for that person is U.S. Constitution, which is that document, coincidentally. the context we put things in, it confuses people all the time. And reality is, when someone is not sure, that person is falling behind. It's no such thing as alternate or differ to the latter and stay up on pace as well. People that are confused fall behind. And it doesn't look that way when he or she is innovative enough to find an alternative very fast and keep up on the beat, if you will. I think watching that happen is how a lot of people fail to help our fellow man and fellow woman when we're, as people, falling behind. It's easy to say, Monday's a meeting for John, Sally, and Susie. And when Monday comes, if only John and Susie are there, then, there's something that the missing person can do to make up for that time missed, to compensate, if you will, for that lack of information that he is going to have to deal with or live with. But that's not all to that matter. That case, it depends on if John and Susie are willing to realistically and literally help that person get the information that was not received in the meeting but was discussed in the meeting. That's going to happen by bringing the same materials that were at the meeting to that person, sitting down, what have you, with that person, and giving another version of that meeting to that person. Not just telling that person what you missed was this, what you missed was that, because you're just telling that person that continuous thing that they missed this information. They missed this meeting. What they need is the presence of the meeting in their logical life in order to process what it takes to handle the information, to work with the information in real situations, in real time, not just on paper, not just in a class, not just, in front of an audience, rehearsed, not just for recital, not just for practice, not just for studying, but for a real time situation. Hypothetically speaking, a scenario. We miss out a lot of times being very ironic and being very sarcastic on applying the time that scenarios occur in with each other, so that we don't have to experience a scenario, hypothetically speaking. Now, I say that because I'm not being ironic and I'm not being sarcastic. And even if I was being ironic or sarcastic, or particularly wasn't being ironic or sarcastic, the point in it is not any way you look at it to be directed towards a person. Irony is meant to be used as a talent or as a gift, an immediate, or one of the endowments, if you will, that, as the U.S. Constitution states, that we as persons have individually. And so is sarcasm. We've learned those terms from articulate individuals that have trusted us with that information. And they've, before that point, handled that information very responsibly, because they had the understanding in a natural way and a common sense what that word or those words meant based on how they were taught those words. We have a blessing in genealogical form, and it's how the most of us, whether the majority or minority, are happy in this world. No matter what social background we're from, no matter what ethnic background we're from. But as we exist, there's a proportion of us that are happy, and equal to those that are successful. In this world, we are only facing an equation all the time. That's my theory. And that's not interfering with mathematics or the study of art. Now, everyone's not that way. Some are interested in the U.S. Constitution. I may be a little bit more flexible with using it, so that the point can be made a little more in where it's a right and it's a freedom. Combining those two or collaborating with the two of them, frankly, I'm going to probably just say the U.S. Constitution instead of U.S. Constitution, the way I prefer to say it, and make things a little easier between us to get across to the innocent ears and the willing spirits. So, when the U.S. Constitution says, you have individual rights, and each of us has those rights. We, the people, have these things, and these things come from the Supreme Being. These things we've been endowed with. We can use these things up to an infinite number of times, possibly. And we probably will in that context, because the Supreme Being governs over us all. Religion, it's a part of us. There is not really, according to the U.S. Constitution, a particular time where or when religion takes place. Also, that goes for social contract. In the context that it's in the U.S. Constitution in, a social contract, it's an infinite kind of relationship element. It's a factor, therefore, as we go along the roads of the U.S. Constitution, if you will, onto this path of life that's life itself, from one to the other. And per se, we cannot find in that kind of context a question in the U.S. Constitution. It's not an interrogative document. It's not a declarative document. It's imperative. And I may be alone on this, but from what I read, it's imperative. And since it is imperative, I just don't understand where the different uses are coming from. Why it's in courtrooms for trials. Why it's in any one particular courtroom for any trial at all. I don't understand in the courtroom with a defense and an offense why there's a need to use the U.S. Constitution as an example in one perspective, and then in a cross examination used it again. Each party's using the U.S. Constitution and not to come to an immediate agreement because of the U.S. Constitution, where it seems that they are trying to each make a dominating point, or reach a dominating factor in the U.S. Constitution based on the U.S. Constitution. I don't understand why that happens with what is consistent about the U.S. Constitution, what's consistent in the U.S. Constitution. It's not a hard document to read. It may seem that way if it's your first time reading it. Before you've read it, it may seem that way because it's not in first person perspective. But once you've read the U.S. Constitution, and you don't have to read the whole thing, just read enough of it. Read a couple of paragraphs. If it's not just one paragraph, frankly, read it, and then you can go back to it to read it again, more or less, and easily find the element therein, easily come to terms with the document itself, where judgment may be concerned or constructive criticism may be concerned. I don't see anything that can really happen with the U.S. Constitution. If you want to spell check, okay. If you want to proofread, okay. But we're talking now about how the world's affected when the world goes through changes, and we're at a point where we're on the U.S. Constitution and how to solve these kinds of problems, so that we're now compounded with our natural vulnerability as humans, as mammals, and frankly could be as well as individuals. That's not consistent. And that's possible only because things that we have created, things that we have done, are not accepted by everyone. In the context where we're specifically implying it or applying it, someone in the crowd is saying, I disagree. It's just like at a wedding. When someone has the opportunity to say that they are not in favor of the groom and the bride wedding to each other, and someone takes the opportunity to say they're not in favor. Who are you? What is your real reason? And I'm not trying to be sarcastic. Remember these words. And remember these words. Who are you? And therefore, what are you talking about? Why is this the time for what you're talking about? Frankly, how have you come to this? And once again, we're not talking about irony. We're not talking about sarcasm. We're not talking about ebonics. We're not talking about short form. We're not talking about poetry. We're talking face to face. What are you talking about? Why is it your subject? How, when you're not realistically a part of this matter? And when, as in what context are you using? When do you expect what you're saying here or there? Where your faith is? Where is your mind? What mindset do you have? Because to say something, that's one thing. But if you have in fact a sense of what you're saying, you can also come up with, if you don't already have it immediately, a sense for when you expect the reaction or result of what you're saying. That's if you're articulate and you understand the importance of vocabulary, not talking, not speaking, not speech or grammar. Now, I don't have anything personal, and I never will, towards or against whoever says it's my turn, I disagree, they shouldn't be married. Because that's a part of individual rights. That's a person's right to do that. And that's why that opportunity is extended. It's just with the bride, with the groom, and this third party, mathematically true. To solve the equation or to speak out, it includes who, what, when, where, why, and in my theory also how. Now, I understand somewhat that in reporting news, a reporter likes to gather who, what, when, where, and why of a story. That's good when the reporter's realistically just doing his or her job. But when you're living in a world where someone is going to challenge you, and faithfully believe this, someone is going to challenge you. It could be a lightweight, it could be a heavyweight, it could be a middleweight, it could be a flyweight, it could be a welterweight. It varies, but the challenge is what we're focusing on. When someone is going to challenge you, you have to be as yourself, more of yourself. And that's where the how comes in. And some think the how is ironic, some think it's sarcastic. I think it's necessary only because challenges come about from time to time. As a human race, we're not due for any challenges. We come in this world, we go out of this world, if you will. I think that's enough for us to have to deal with. I personally don't agree with problems. I don't think problems exist. In an equation, frankly, a problem is presented just because there's already an answer. That problem is not meant to shift the momentum or the equilibrium in the equation. That problem is represented and reflected by the equation itself. That's what an equation means. When we solve an equation, we don't come up with what the variable x is, or f is, or I, or c, or s. What we come up with is what's equivalent to the variable. Thus, we solve the equation. We don't solve what the real equation is. We don't solve the real equation. We solve for the variable. Understand this. Understand why you learn, not what you learn, when it comes to Sound City sometimes. And life is this way. We're always just living with an equation. The Supreme Being has created us. We've not created ourselves. That's where we come in to an equation. We use our five senses, and we do not know how we use them. We know why. We know when. We know where. We know who, of course. And we know what, of course. What? The Supreme Being. Who? He, him, her, she. It's only two species, male and female. That's the earth. When? All the time. That's infinite. Where? Everywhere. That's infinite. You know, who, what, when, where, why. The who, the what, the when, the where, and the why. How? That's where we get to exist. And in that how, we're at confusion today because of the pandemic, something that's spread globally. And that's sad that we don't have our common intelligence sense on hand just in case something that really is important happens. Now here we are with possibly our fellow man, fellow woman, each other, frankly, at the ends of where we stand on an axis mathematically, and all we can get is scientists, someone that's going to explain. That's fine if you're able to explain. I agree. But I disagree that you feel compelled to explain instead of applying what you hear whenever you hear a story, any story, to yourself, and never being able to return from that direction as a result of applying it to yourself, because your life is equivalent to every other life on this planet. I don't understand those that go on a journey and come back. I do understand those that go from home to the grocery store and come back. When you are consistent, you can be understood. But when you're hopping around because the world has already prepared your way, you make things confusing. You don't make problems. You don't make trouble. You make things confusing, which means I'm not taking you out of the equation. I'm saying in the equation, you belong. Now, it's up to each person, of course, in my opinion, and I proudly think so, to handle your own issues. Process is another word that I could use. Process what you're going through. Use critical thinking skills. Critically think about what you're going through, instead of drawing a conclusion. There's no time in real life to draw a conclusion for anything. We take for granted the time we spend in this world, while people come and go every verbatim day, in and out of this world. I wish we focused more on that. The fact that we really do go just as we came. We plural. When it comes to just us, when it comes to we, us, them, they, their, y'all, or you all, we just come and go under the Supreme Being's control and discretion. There's no time to do any choice of things. There's no time to decide anything amongst a choice. There's no time to process those gifts we've been endowed with. This is what the U.S. Constitution is describing. It's not explaining that, because that's against the point for the U.S. Constitution. It's describing life as life has been given or granted to us, not per se. And I think some people are using it per se. And frankly, I'm here to say it's confusing people, and those people are emotionally, intelligently hurt because of it. It's during this pandemic that we cannot locate or decipher, and we deserve to know what else we're going to do. What else? Not what else to fight the virus. What to do to fight the virus, okay, but what else? Please. If it was something that redundancy really could do justice, that's different. I'm for justice. What I'm saying right now is about justice. That's different from law. That's different from politics. That's different from ethics. That's different from art. Justice. It's only a few of just kinds of persons, if you will, that come about in this lifetime. And the time spent socially by each of these or those kinds of individuals is brief, because ironically the point has already been understood. And just a reminder for our neighbor or fellow man, fellow woman, is what the occasion is all about. It's called articulation. Articulate is a person that as a human being is respectful to who else lives in this world. An articulate person doesn't necessarily have to understand anything. You understand this? According, frankly, and under the Supreme Being, no one has to do anything except abide by the commandments the Supreme Being has installed for each person, specifically for each person. It doesn't do any good to say, I'm supposed to wake up every Thursday morning, and so are the rest that live on the block. And I actually don't really feel like doing it, because I'm not going to do it myself. It's not just going to be me. It's got to be me and the rest of the block. Because you've got to accept that you live in this world in one aspect, and in another aspect where the two combine. When you are accepting, you have to accept that you live in this world, and so do everyone else. So does everyone else. So do those others on the block. You don't have to accept whatever it is in your imagination that leads you to think that there's a coincidence between you and everyone else on the block. You don't have to be so eager to learn or retain information or be informative or be educated or be knowledgeable that you're making coincidences come to mind. You're trying to find how what you do is just like what someone else does. That means you're afraid of something. And when you're afraid of something and you fear that thing, you can't do much to help someone else. When that person's going through a natural crisis, you could stand to wait until you can understand the possible avenues that person is confronted with or has accessible at that time to him or herself. These are the just points that make us up and that make this world up. We have to let the Constitution be the Constitution. The U.S. Constitution, I mean. We have to let the U.S. Constitution be the U.S. Constitution. If it's written as the U.S. Constitution and it's submitted as the U.S. Constitution, at that point you decide historically, hypothetically speaking, you decide if you want to accept what life is going to be like and what change is going to be like because of the U.S. Constitution before you decide to accept the U.S. Constitution or the submittal or submission of the U.S. Constitution. You don't accept the U.S. Constitution before you've made your mind clear that you can deal with how the U.S. Constitution is going to affect lifestyle and how it's not going to affect lifestyle prior to accepting it. In reality, the person, the author, took a 50-50 chance submitting the U.S. Constitution and also took a 50-50 chance writing the U.S. Constitution based on the same principle. And that's the chance in life. It's the reason the U.S. Constitution was created or written. Challenges. It reminds me once again of an analogy that I strategically use often and frequently, as the story of the two brothers, the family of Cain and Abel. God bless the dead. God bless the dead. You know, two brothers, different. According to the story, the storyboard, opposite. We cannot live in those morbid instances together. You have to separate yourself, however that's possible in this equation, as well as your mindset right now in this equation, according to colleges nationwide. And let the rest of us continue, if you will, with normal scheduled things. What you're doing is going to go on for a specific amount of time. There's time allotted. Remember this. What you're doing, you plan to do. You decided as well how long you were going to take to do it, how much time you were going to spend doing it or on it. And after that time has passed, you're going to do something else. You know that too, in length and in detail. What's missing is your concentration. You're motivated. You've got something to say. You're enthused as well, therefore. You're present. You have something to say. But intelligently, you've got to as well decide on what comes about what you have to say and not keep that to yourself. You've got to express that when you're expressing everything else. That's called thorough. You've got to be thorough when you step out into society and attempt to interact with the world. Because if you don't, you confuse people. And some people are more sensitive than others. Some people's feelings are hurt. And it's not really because you directly embarrassed him or her or insulted him or her. It's because in the natural sense, you've not included him or her in this equation. You've not included him or her. And frankly, you've instead decluded him or her. The U.S. Constitution, it talks about how we have unalienable rights, unalienable, not alien rights, not unalien rights. Back in an equation, unalienable rights. That's a just equation. And then it talks about social contract, popular sovereignty, things that we have as a result of having unalienable rights. The endowment it's discussing or describing. The endowment, the result. It's like having therefore instead of however in a sentence. The U.S. Constitution in the articulate form of government that this world was at the time the U.S. Constitution was authored, dealt more, you can tell by the context of the document, with therefore more popularly than however in general. Therefore. Now it gets really specific, and further more it gets more articulate in that it's addressing democracy and the republic simultaneously. It is trying to be declarative, but the author is wise enough to continue the document to be imperative in context. It's imperative. That's a good thing on the author's behalf, since, once again, the perspective that the document's written in is not first-person perspective. And so here's the chance for others to appreciate the document or art, and have a good wish, a good hope for the author in the sakes of the supreme being, that the document does not indicate the author except in a plural context, nor does the document depict the author from one line to the next, where things, if you will, can be arranged, if you will, into context with the consistency of one document that has a number of things that it talks about. And not to say the U.S. Constitution, can break up into a document that's about social contract. It can break off into a second component that's a document about popular sovereignty. It can go into a third document that's about freedom. It can go into a fourth document that's about unalienable rights, so on and so forth. And that's to keep it in one context and actually deal with how the U.S. Constitution compounds the expectation of those that are not, frankly, aware of the natural world, that we are susceptible to things like the pandemic in all the day long. Some things are out of our, if you will, control, that are in, however, the Supreme Being's control. We have to exercise religion and not compensate for religion with politics or discussion or the faith or substance of things not seen, just because those things, which are things, have to dwell or remain in an equation for total peace, for every person to experience his or her individual rights. We cannot take advantage of time, first of all, because time is faster than we are. Second of all, because time granted is just time granted and just granted. The problem in this world, which is starting to emerge from the deep sea, if you will, and thank the Lord, is some of us really do not believe, period. Some of us are lacking belief. And that's evident because we all have an imagination. We all have a brain that's faster than we are. And so no one's faster than the human eye. Things are, more interesting than others. Yes. And no. But I personally am one of the types that doesn't try to emphasize that much. Something's important and something else isn't. To me, so what? So what? We're living in an equation. We're living with an equation, not an expression. An expression comes from an equation. An expression is one of those sophisticated ways to talk about the equation that we're in. It's one of those articulate means of communication. Frankly, we don't really want to get deep enough to reveal that an expression doesn't teach us anything but a lesson. There's no opportunity to learn, per se, with an expression. There is a lesson, and because there's an equation that qualifies you and makes you eligible for this logic and for the intelligence, you're presented with an equation, because I could get that deep. And that could become shallow too. The reason why is because I'm aware of humanity. I'm aware of humanity. As much as sounds go about, motors, drills, saws, buzz, chains, all of that, I still believe all of that is a lesson and a class that I am to learn from if I'm to succeed. Not in 30 years worth of time, not way down the road or anything like that, but for the moment at which I really am aware that I'm alive and due to survive. It's something for me to learn. Make an A, make a B, make a C, make a D, make an F, make an E, make an S, make an N, make a U. But not an incomplete. Learn. You see, it's not about how much you can put in. When you're working with a variable, volume, science is science. Math is math. And when you're peaceful enough, all those things combine, yeah. We hear about that. There's cartoons, combining earth and wind and water and fire and heart. Yeah, but remember, the person or people or persons themselves are into positivity. And those things are possible. But if you're into challenging, math is math. Science is science. And they don't show up at the same time. That's not how an articulate design is designed or constructed. What that means for challengers, I suppose, because I don't make these discussions up. I don't make this up. I study and I listen to my lectures, the lectures that I'm listening to. I take in those points best I can, and I apply what I learn to my personal life experiences. I analyze stories. I question things that I have answers to as well. I participate in evaluating my reaction to the story, and I use critical thinking skills. I'm aware of my emotional intelligence and the different emotional intelligence or EIQ that exist. I'm aware of what resilience is. I'm aware of what motivation is and the types of motivation, as well as control, locus of control, and what types of locus of control exist. I'm delivering this, and I'm not a failing student. Just for the record, I'm not just a passing student either. I'm honor roll level, which means my processing is up to date enough to address this from a personal perspective or standpoint, as long as that's as far or near as I intend for it to go, versus competition, debate, battle, compromise, negotiation, sports, what have you. The issue that Americans are hurt about is not the pandemic. The issue comes right back home. It's us as people. As we continue to live in this humongous planet Earth as a world, people, us, we have got to come to reality, not agreement, not terms, not understanding, reality. You know, this is just totally doing something that's not ironic, totally doing as well something that's not sarcastic. Something that's a just myth, a true myth, not fantasy. Which is, let things be. Let places be. And as a person, here in the noun word, choose from how many things there are, and choose from how many places there are. But upon or amongst things and or places, do not decide, because in this equation you do two things. You take yourself attemptably out of the equation, which means you're blindfolded and you can't see as the part of the equation, and you assume in that time no one else is in the equation because you're missing. And that is where we get into multiples, things that go on out to the infinite towards positive infinity or negative infinity, where articulate persons cite it. Okay? And bring it to your attention. You know, by taking yourself out, you can't see it at all, the thing it is, plus what is in the thing that you once could see. You have to turn over and over and over and over with it and create multiples of something that's not in it. Plus, turn over and over and over and over something that says you're not going to get back into it. And then you're left with something that compounds and takes you on the ride that's in the world of life. And you're already on that ride. Your parents decided that for you. The two of them each were decided upon by two other individuals. Your grandparents each were decided upon by two other individuals. Now, the reality here is good enough to talk about. I don't need to get into the U.S. Constitution. I don't need to get into what justice is. I don't need to get into what fairness is, what relationships are, what people are, what students are, what college is, what education is, what instructors mean, what the values of education are, what are positives or negatives, what are pros and cons. None of that's necessary as long as I know what this issue is about. And coincidentally, this issue being about us. I'm healthy. And I'm in great plus shape as 40 years old has come to my life thus far. I'm still to be taken for 40 years old. Instead of 26. Now, this is something for intelligent persons before we get out of here. I'm raw. I'm a smooth dude. And that's not to be boastful. And that's not to be competitive. Because I meant that in the second person perspective. So we'll get to it at last and finally leave all of our neighbors with a homework lesson. That's to find out what I just said in terms of who, what, when, where, why, and how. Take care and stay safe.